I'm Lauren Elizabeth Summers, and last Friday night, I walked into Lumarse, Manhattan's most exclusive French restaurant, as the forgotten daughter no one expected to see. My mother adjusted her pearls, my sister demanded the best table, and my father barely looked up from the wine list. They didn't invite me out of love. They invited me because appearances mattered, because questions would be asked if the eldest Summers daughter wasn't at her father's birthday dinner. But they had no idea the restaurant they were flaunting belonged to me. And I had no intention of telling them. Not right away. If you've ever been treated like the least important person in the room, only to realize you were the one holding the key the whole time, this story is for you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit subscribe. Because what happened next? The night I received the invitation, I almost deleted it without reading. It was from Riley, my younger sister, the family's golden child, and it read like a calendar notice, not a message to someone she once shared a bedroom with. Dinner for Dad's birthday. Friday, 7 p.m., Lumarse. Dress nice. There was no, "We'd love to see you," no "Hope you're well," just coordinates, like I was a necessary seat to be filled. For a moment, I hovered over the screen, thumb twitching above the decline button. I hadn't been invited to much lately. Not to their European vacation, not to Riley's promotion party, not even to Christmas last year. They said it was just too hectic and that flights were crazy. But I'd seen the photos online. Matching pajamas, matching smiles. No empty chair in sight. So why now? Because Lumarse wasn't just a restaurant. It was the restaurant. Exclusive, glamorous, nearly impossible to reserve on a Friday night in Manhattan. And not showing up would have raised questions. Not from me, but from the world they were trying to impress. They needed me for the photo, but I wasn't going for them. I was going for the quiet truth I'd carried too long. For the version of me they chose not to see. And because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk in, calmly, where they never thought you belonged. I chose my dress carefully. Black, simple, handmade by a Parisian tailor who didn't even have a website. It didn't scream money. It whispered substance. I wore no jewelry, no designer bag. Just me, as I am. I left my apartment early, even though it was only a 10-minute walk to Lumarse. I wanted to feel the city breathe. The cold air grounded me. The sound of my heels on pavement reminded me of who I'd become. As I approached the familiar glass doors, a wave of memory hit me. The first time I walked into this building, I was a nervous applicant, clutching my resume in trembling fingers. Tonight, I would walk in as the woman who signed the executive chef's paycheck. The maitre d' spotted me before I reached the front desk. His eyes flickered, just for a second, with recognition. Then came the smooth, professional mask. He knew the plan. Everyone did. I paused before entering, watching the reflection of the glowing sign above Lumarse. My reflection was calm, centered, ready. For years, they had painted me as the outsider, the one who didn't fit, the one who had potential but poor priorities. They never said it outright, but their silence, their omissions, and their endless list of events I wasn't invited to said everything. But tonight, I wasn't showing up to beg for a seat. I already owned the table, and they were about to find out. The Summers family knew how to make an entrance, or at least, they thought they did. Riley was first through the doors, wrapped in a floor-length crimson gown that caught the light like polished glass. It was haute couture, recognizable to anyone who read Vogue, and impossible to miss for anyone who worked in fine dining. She paused at the entrance just long enough for heads to turn, then offered a tight, practiced smile like a celebrity gracing the room with her presence. "Reservation for Summers. Party of 4, she said. Not to the maitre d' but over him, like she was announcing it to the air. Behind her, my mother followed. Her posture regal, Her pearl earrings perfectly matched to the cream silk scarf around her shoulders. She wore the confidence of someone who never worried about where her next reservation would come from. And why would she? When Riley called for bookings, people moved heaven and earth to say yes. At least, they used to. I entered quietly, a step behind them. My dress was black, understated, and intentionally anonymous. It wasn't made to draw eyes. It was made to let mine stay sharp. I watched Riley glide past the hostess stand, the click of her heels echoing with entitlement. Her eyes swept the room, not for beauty, but for hierarchy. Who looked at her? Who didn't? Who mattered? The hostess, Grace, smiled and gestured for us to follow. She was new. I'd only met her once, during orientation, but she'd been briefed. We moved through the dining room, past white linens, crystal stemware, and quiet conversations. The kind of atmosphere is built to make people feel elevated. Riley walked like she believed the room was built around her. "Excuse me," she said, abruptly stopping near a passing waiter. "You almost bumped into me. Could you watch where you're going?" The young man, Nico, froze for a second. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. "I'm terribly sorry." "Ma'am," he said quickly. "Just be careful." Riley snapped. This dress wasn't exactly made for close calls. I watched her expression as she turned away. That same smug lift in her brow she'd had since we were kids. Back then, it was about who had the better Halloween costume. Now it was about power she thought she'd earned, when all she'd ever done was inherit it. Mom pretended not to notice the exchange. She was too busy commenting on the lighting. Elegant, but not overdone. "I like that. Gerald should consider something similar for the club renovation." My father nodded distractedly, already reaching for the wine list as we were seated. We took our places. Riley on one end, Mom beside her, Dad across. I sat across from Riley, folding my hands calmly in my lap as the server poured water. Riley glanced at me, eyes dragging across my dress. "You know, I admire your commitment to minimalism," she said sweetly. "It takes confidence to walk into Lumarse dressed like you're heading to a PTA meeting." The words stung, but not in the way she hoped. They weren't new, just better dressed. I offered a small smile. Comfort is underrated. Riley lifted her glass, smirking. "So is taste." That was when Marco approached the table. "Welcome to Lumarse," he said warmly, looking first at my parents, then Riley. His tone was professional, courteous, but when his eyes landed on me, there was a pause, just half a second longer than expected. Then, quietly, respectfully, he said, "Miss Summers." Riley didn't notice, but I did. So did Nico, still clearing the table behind us. And Grace, watching from the corner of the room. Riley thought she'd just corrected a waiter. What she didn't realize was that she'd just insulted an employee of mine. And dinner had only just begun. The first course hadn't even arrived, and already the room was shifting. Not loudly, not in a way my family would notice, but I could feel it, like a current beneath calm water. The kind of shift is only visible if you know exactly what to look for. Marco's Miss Summers had slipped past Riley's radar, but it hadn't gone unnoticed by the staff. Grace, the hostess, glanced in my direction once more, then quickly returned to her podium. Dominic, one of our senior servers, adjusted his jacket with subtle precision before making his way to our table. He walked the way we'd trained him to walk when serving VIPs, measured, deliberate, silent. Dad was still reading the wine list as if it were a contract. "Prices like these," he muttered. "No wonder they're profitable." He chuckled, unaware that he was complimenting my margins. "I'll take care of the wine," Riley offered breezily. "Daddy shouldn't have to overthink on his birthday." She flagged Dominic with a flick of her fingers. Could we get the 2012 Pinot from Willamette, she asked, tone clipped. It's the only one on here that isn't a total ripoff. Dominic nodded without reacting. He looked at me before walking away. Not for instruction, not for approval, but as a quiet courtesy. I returned the look with the smallest nod. Riley didn't notice. She was too busy scrolling through her phone, likely checking in on social media to see who'd seen her story about dining at Lumarse. To her, this wasn't a meal. It was a performance. My mother leaned toward the centerpiece, gently rearranging the orchids. Lovely arrangement, she murmured. A touch too bold, but tasteful. I requested that one last minute, I said, more to myself than to her. She asked, not hearing or not caring. Marco returned to our table a moment later with a basket of bread. He presented it with practiced formality. A selection of sourdough, truffle focaccia, and the house rosemary loaf, fresh from the oven. Smells nice, Mom said absently. Lifting a piece, Riley wrinkled her nose. Isn't truffle a bit overdone these days? Everyone uses it to sound fancy. Marco didn't respond. He turned slightly toward me. Shall I have the kitchen hold the truffle items? Miss Summers. I smiled softly. No need, Marco. Chef Antoine and I trust each other. At that, he gave a slight bow and stepped away. This time, Riley blinked. Wait, Chef Antoine and you, she asked. I looked up. We've worked together before. Riley laughed. Not kindly. Oh, right. Your bistro days. She said it like a stage whisper, like a joke only she and my mother were in on. Dominic returned with the wine bottle Riley had ordered. He opened it smoothly, poured a small amount into her glass, and waited. She swirled it too fast, took a sip, then nodded with fake expertise. Acceptable. Dominic moved to pour for the others, but when he reached me, he paused. Would you prefer the house vintage? Miss Summers, he asked quietly. I believe we still have a few bottles of the 1982 Bordeaux. Riley froze. So did Mom. Dad looked up sharply. Wait. That Bordeaux, he asked. That's not on the menu. No, sir, Dominic said. It's reserved for special guests. He didn't say which guest. He didn't need to. I held Dominic's gaze a second longer, then nodded. That would be lovely, I said. He bowed his head slightly and left. The silence at the table thickened. Riley stared at her wine glass like it had betrayed her. Mom's hand hovered over her bread plate, but didn't move. None of them spoke. They didn't know what was happening yet, but they could feel it. And I, calm, quiet, in my black dress and handmade heels, had only just begun. The bread plates had been cleared, and the hush that followed wasn't comfort. It was tension, the kind that sits just beneath conversation, waiting to break. Riley twirled her fork against the tablecloth, her glass of Willamette untouched. Her phone buzzed once. She checked it, smiled briefly, then tucked it away, the performance back on. I hope we're not doing the full tasting menu, she said suddenly, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. It's charming and all, but some of us have metabolisms worth protecting. Mom chuckled lightly, as if that counted as wit. Then Riley turned to me. Lauren, she said, leaning forward slightly, her voice thick with false sweetness. Maybe just order something simple tonight. Wouldn't want to rack up a bill you can't cover, or embarrass the family in front of strangers. The table stilled. I didn't flinch. I didn't answer. I just let the words hang there, untouched, like cheap perfume in expensive air. And that was the moment Marco returned. He approached with the practiced elegance of someone who'd worked Michelin tier service for years. He wasn't rushed. He wasn't flustered. He stopped beside our table with the grace of a closing curtain and looked directly at me. Miss Summers, he said, voice calm and measured. Your usual wine has arrived. The 1982 Bordeaux. Would you like me to decant it for the table? For a second, the world didn't move. Riley blinked first. I'm sorry. Did you say Miss Summers? She asked, her voice brittle. Marco didn't acknowledge her. His attention remained on me, posture respectful, tone unchanged. I smiled gently. Yes, please, Marco. And thank you. Of course, he said with a small bow. Chef Antoine has also asked if you'd prefer your regular table, but as it's your father's birthday, we assumed this one would be more fitting. He turned and left. The air thickened. Dad slowly set down his water glass. What is going on, I think? I said softly. You just met me properly. For the first time. Mom stared at the decanter now sitting between us, her expression unsure whether to reach for it or pretend it wasn't there. I don't understand, Riley said, her voice wobbling between confusion and panic. You've been here before. I nodded. I've dined here many times, met with Chef Antoine, tasted new dishes, gave feedback. That's what owners do. Silence. Pure, loaded silence. And then Riley did the only thing she could think of. She laughed. But it was hollow, forced, with no conviction. You're not saying, what? You work here, no. I said calmly. I own it. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. You own Lumarse. I took a sip of water, among others. Marco returned, pouring the first taste of the Bordeaux with the same reverence he always did. He poured for me, then glanced toward the others. I gave a polite nod. Please pour for the table, I said. It's a special night. After all. Dad didn't speak. Mom's face had gone slightly pale. But Riley looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under her world and replaced it with the truth. It was the first time I'd ever seen her genuinely unsure of her place in a room, and for once, she couldn't reclaim it with a dress, a name, or a dig at my income, because none of that mattered anymore. Not here, not tonight. The Bordeaux caught the candlelight as it swirled gently in the decanter, its deep garnet hue a quiet declaration of age, patience, and value. Marco poured with practiced grace, and I watched as each glass filled, mine first, then my father's, then Riley's and my mother's. No one spoke. They were still trying to find footing in a conversation that had shifted without warning. Riley recovered first. She always did. Her composure had been polished since prep school, layered over with designer charm and social agility. She lifted her glass as if nothing had happened, forcing a tight smile. Well, she said, I guess congratulations are in order. I had no idea you were involved with Lumarse. Involved. I echoed gently, swirling the wine in my glass. That's one way to put it. I just thought you still had that little apartment and your thing with the food trucks, she continued, trying to lace her voice with curiosity instead of judgment, but it didn't land. I do still have the apartment, I said. She blinked. Seriously, it's small, quiet, has lots of natural light. You live in a 600-square-foot walk-up, she said flatly, turning to our parents like she was inviting them into the joke. And you're pouring a wine that costs more than your monthly rent. I never said the apartment was cheap, I replied. Calm as ever. Riley's brow creased. But you don't even wear labels. You don't have a car. You still take the subway. I set my glass down, the sound soft but final. Because I choose to. That silence again. Different this time. Not confusion. Not shocking. Recognition. My father looked at me closely now, as if seeing something he couldn't explain. My mother, who had spent her life measuring success in square footage and leather handbags, said nothing. I invest in what matters. I continued. My people, my team, the food, the experience. I don't need a Bentley to prove I belong in the room. I built the room. Riley laughed, but it cracked at the edge. You expect me to believe that's intentional, that you're, what, minimalist now? No, I'm deliberate. I said simply, there's a difference. Marco returned with the first course, an amuse-bouche that wasn't on the menu. He placed it in front of me first, nodding with the same reverence I'd earned not through name, but through ownership, through hours spent in test kitchens, through late nights reviewing balance sheets while the rest of the city slept. Chef Antoine prepared this especially, Marco said quietly. He wanted your approval before adding it to the new seasonal menu. Of course, I replied. He served the others in silence. Riley picked up her fork, trying to mask her hesitation. So, you're what? Some kind of secret millionaire now? I looked at her, not unkindly. No. Riley, I'm just not the kind of rich you understand. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. And that, I realized, was the real shift. It wasn't just that I had money, or power, or a portfolio bigger than Dad's golf club guest list. It was that I no longer needed their approval. And they could feel it. My father had been quiet for most of the meal, which in itself was unusual. Gerald Summers was a man of declarations, not silences. But since the Bordeaux had been poured, and Marco called me Miss Summers, he'd been oddly restrained, nursing his wine like it held answers he couldn't find in me. Finally, he set down his glass, adjusted his cufflinks with the precision of someone buying time, and cleared his throat. So, he began, voice steady but searching. How exactly did this happen? Riley shifted in her seat, clearly relieved he'd asked what she couldn't. My mother leaned forward, curious now, not about the food, but the story she had apparently missed entirely. I looked at him. At the man who once told me ambition without structure was just emotional noise. At the man who read resumes the way others read bank statements, looking for logos, legacy, and leverage. Mine had never quite passed his test. You remember when I asked for help with business school, I said. He frowned, vaguely. It was 6 years ago. I continued. I'd just finished my undergrad. I wanted to pursue an MBA with a focus on hospitality strategy. His face tensed. And I told you. You said it wasn't a real plan. I finished for him. That restaurant work was unstable. That no one built wealth from food service. That I should do what Riley did. Finance, corporate structure, something with long-term value. He didn't deny it. I remember. He said quietly. I applied anyway. I said, got in, took night classes, worked in kitchens during the day, front of house on weekends. I paid for it in tips and coffee-fueled hours. Mom blinked. You never told us. You never asked. The table went still again, but this time the silence felt heavier, like it had shape, weight, history. I finished my MBA with a concentration in operational design. I said, while I was still finishing coursework, I developed a modular concept for reviving struggling fine dining spaces using dynamic pricing and chef-driven seasonal curation. Riley's eyes narrowed. What does that even mean? It means, I said evenly, I built a system that makes high-end restaurants profitable without compromising quality. And then I used it to start buying places. Quietly. Starting with a small bistro in Brooklyn, then a gastropub in Boston, then Lumarse. And now my father asked, voice lower. Now I oversee a portfolio of 32 restaurants across 3 continents. I said, Embray in New York, Maison Liora in Paris, and a new flagship opening in London next quarter. Mom reached for her water. Her hand trembled just slightly. "I've eaten at Maison Leora," she whispered. "We had our anniversary dinner there last year." "I know," I said. "You told the staff you knew the owner." She paled. "They told me," I added. Dad leaned back, stunned into stillness. "I built all of it." I continued. "No seed funding, no family loans, just grit, vision, and the drive to prove that I was more than the girl you underestimated." He didn't speak, just looked down at his hands like they didn't belong to him anymore. And in that moment, I wasn't the daughter seeking his pride. I was the woman who no longer needed it. Riley was the first to break the silence, though her voice had lost its usual shine. "Wait," she said, slow and skeptical. "Did you just say Maison Leora? The Maison Leora?" I nodded. "We had to pull strings just to get that reservation," she added. 3-month wait list. Mom called in every favor she had. Mom looked shaken. "You mean, you were the reason we got in?" I didn't answer right away. I simply reached for my wine, letting the weight of the question settle across the table like steam off a winter dish. Then I met her eyes. "Yes," I said. "Though to be fair, I didn't flag your name myself. My team did. They notify me when someone with the Summers name appears on a booking, especially when they insist they know the owner." Mom's hand froze around her napkin. "I didn't want to make it a thing," she said quietly. We were proud." Riley scoffed. "You were proud when you thought the owner was someone else." My mother didn't respond. "Lucienne in Miami." I continued. "The place you raved about to everyone at Thanksgiving mine. So is Mistral and Vine in San Francisco. And the Tokyo restaurant Dad's business partner couldn't stop bragging about. We open next spring. He'll love it." My father blinked, visibly connecting dots he never realized were part of the same puzzle. "You mean, you've been behind all of them?" he asked. "Not all," I said. "Just the ones you named when you were trying to impress people." Riley's face had drained of color. "Wait, so when I used the Summers name, all those times I called ahead and said we were family friends with the owner." I gave her a gentle smile. "They let you in because they thought you were important to me." She stared at me. "You knew?" "Of course. My managers are trained to notify me anytime someone uses my name, or my family name at the door. You'd be surprised how often that happens." Her jaw tightened. "You never said anything." "I didn't need to," I replied. "You were getting exactly what you wanted: recognition. You just didn't know where it was coming from." The irony hung thick in the air. Riley had spent years measuring herself by who she could impress, by which wait lists she could bypass, which private rooms she could name-drop her way into. But the golden key she'd always clutched hadn't been hers. It had been mine. She just never bothered to look down. "And let me guess," she muttered. "The chef's table in London already booked for 3 months." I said. "Though if you'd like to try, I hear the reservation team is firm." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came out. For once, Riley Summers had nothing clever to say. Across the table, my father stared at the tablecloth like it had betrayed him. His legacy had always been about perception, appearances, affiliations, and name recognition. But every time he'd bragged about getting into an impossible restaurant, every time he'd dropped the Summers name like it carried weight, he'd been unknowingly leaning on the daughter he once dismissed. And tonight, over Bordeaux and braised duck, he was finally starting to understand that. They hadn't been impressing the world. They'd been walking through doors I'd built, on floors I owned, under ceilings I designed, and I'd let them. Until now. Riley shifted in her chair, eyes flicking toward the wineglass as if it might offer her a way out of the conversation. "It didn't." "You never said anything," she muttered, barely looking up. "Not once. All those times I name-dropped you, All the reservations. You just let it happen, I did. I said quietly. At first, I thought it didn't matter. Then, I realized it did. My voice wasn't angry. It didn't need to be. The truth was heavy enough. You used my name when it helped you skip a line. You rolled your eyes when the table wasn't ready fast enough. I know the tone you use when you speak to hosts. I've heard the way you dismiss servers when they don't move quickly enough to meet your expectations. Riley scoffed, but there was no power behind it. So I'm impatient. Who cares? I set down my fork. You said to a hostess in Boston, "Call your manager. I know the owner." And when she explained there'd be a short wait, you threatened to write a negative review on your social media, said she'd be lucky to keep her job. She froze. Mom shifted beside her, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sure she didn't mean, I have the transcript, I said, not unkindly. We record all reservation line calls for service quality. Your voice was very clear. Riley looked at Dad like he might defend her, but he just stared at his plate. You told a waiter at Maison Leora that his accent wasn't French enough to justify the price. That same night, you complained the lighting made your earrings look cheap. I was joking, she said, her voice brittle. No one laughed. I replied. But the staff remembered. I turned toward my mother. And you, Mom, you once called ahead to request that we make sure the servers weren't too chatty, because you wanted a high-end experience, not a backyard barbecue. That note went into the system. The entire team saw it. Her hand flinched at her wine glass. You acted like you were above them, because in your mind, dining well isn't about connection, it's about hierarchy. And you assumed, every time, that your behavior didn't follow you out the door. Riley's voice dropped. So what? You've just been collecting receipts? No, I said softly. I've been protecting people. That made them pause. My staff isn't perfect, but they work hard, they care, they make mistakes and correct them. They put their names, their backs, and their pride into what they do. And when someone walks in acting like the world owes them a table with a view and a server who never speaks unless spoken to, it chips away at that. Riley leaned forward. You think I'm a bad person? I think, I said carefully. You've been allowed to move through rooms assuming people would absorb your bad days in silence. No one spoke. I let the quiet linger, just long enough for it to settle where it needed to. Then I sat back in my chair, folded my hands neatly in my lap, and said the one thing I'd never dared to say until now. I know everything that happens in my restaurants. They blinked. I know who you charmed, who are you embarrassed by, who went home shaken, who asked not to serve at your table again. You may have thought you were invisible behind the name, but I've seen all of it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was earned. For the first time in years, they had to face the version of themselves that existed outside the curated family photos, outside of charity events and Christmas cards. The version that came through the front door looked down at a server and said, "Do you know who I am?" And tonight, they got their answer. The shift in my mother's posture was almost imperceptible, shoulders softening, voice lowering, the performative edge of disapproval replaced by something more familiar: calculation. Riley followed, adjusting her tone like someone realizing the spotlight had moved to another stage, and she'd been left behind. You've really built something incredible, Lauren, Mom said with a gentle smile. And I mean that. All of this. It's visionary. Riley chimed in, her voice suddenly warm. Seriously, this is next level. I mean, if you ever wanted to explore partnerships, like a brand extension or upscale product line, I know people. Big names. I didn't respond right away. I let them linger in the silence they used to make me sit in, the kind that asked me to shrink just to keep the peace. But I didn't shrink anymore. I appreciate the interest, I said. my tone calm but firm. But I'm not looking for family involvement. Mom blinked. Oh, I didn't mean that we'd interfere. Just contribute, support. That's not how this works, I said. Not anymore. The days of receiving perks just for being a summer are over. My name doesn't open doors for you. Not unless you've earned it. Riley forced a light laugh. Come on, it's not like we expect special treatment. I met her eyes. But you've demanded it. For years. And the people on the receiving end of that behavior are done pretending you're entitled to it. Marco appeared at the edge of the table, discreet as ever, holding his tablet in one hand. Excuse me, Miss Summers, he said. Apologies for interrupting. Morgan Stanley just sent over a revised proposal. 12 times projected annual earnings, full equity buyout, optional leadership rollover. Riley looked stunned. Morgan Stanley. Wait, the Morgan Stanley. I nodded slowly. That's the third time they've increased the offer. Mom straightened. Lauren, that's an extraordinary valuation. You're seriously considering walking away from that no? I said simply. I already declined. Marco gave a respectful nod. Would you like me to respond now? Tell them I stand by my last answer, I said. Not for sale. Yes, ma'am. He turned and walked away, as seamless as always. The silence that followed was heavier than the ones before, because this one had weight, value, power. Riley finally spoke, trying to recover. But 12 times earnings. That's unheard of. I offered a faint smile. That's what happens when you build something real, slowly, intentionally, and without compromise. Dad, for the first time that evening, leaned forward slightly. You could walk away a very wealthy woman. I already am, I said, because I own every part of this, not just the restaurants, the respect, the growth, the integrity. I didn't inherit this. I earned it. I looked at all three of them. And the irony is, while you were busy laughing at my budget dresses and tiny apartment, I was creating something that none of you could buy into. Not with your names, not with your money, not anymore. They didn't reply, because there was nothing left to argue. The equation had changed. They were no longer the ones offering approval. They were the ones trying to be included. And I had finally learned how to say no. The soufflé was perfect. Of course, Chef Antoine never missed. Its surface cracked just slightly under the spoon. Warm, precise, confident. Just like the evening I had orchestrated. Mom dabbed her lips with her napkin and leaned in, her voice light and bright like we were old friends again. Lauren, we should really host something in your honor. A formal celebration. I'm thinking something elegant. Maybe a rooftop event? We know plenty of people who'd love to support a rising star. Riley jumped in without missing a beat. Yes, I could handle the guest list and PR. Think curated press photos. An interview or two. You've built a brand, and people should see it. We'd just help bring it to the next level. I let the offer sit on the table, untouched, like a dish I never ordered. I'm not interested in that kind of celebration, I said gently. The team and I have our own milestones to mark, and we do it quietly, internally. Mom blinked. But it would be good for the business. Maybe, I said, but not good for my boundaries. The words landed like a soft tap on porcelain. Not loud, but impossible to ignore. Riley straightened in her seat, trying a softer angle. Okay, fair enough. But before we leave, could I see the kitchen? Just for a second. I'd love to meet Chef Antoine. It's not every day your sister owns a culinary empire. I gave her a polite smile. The kitchen is reserved for staff and ownership. She blinked. Seriously, for hygiene reasons, I added. You understand. Her face faltered for a second, and for once, she didn't have a clever reply. I stood, slowly, letting the weight of the moment fill the space that used to belong to them. The same space I once shrank to fit. Not anymore. Marco stepped forward with impeccable timing, as always. Marco, I said softly, please make sure my family has everything they need to finish. Certainly, Miss Summers. And, I added, turning slightly, be sure to add the standard gratuity to their bill. Riley's mouth opened. Wait. Bill? I turned back with a calm expression. Yes. I don't compare family. It wouldn't be good business. Mom looked startled. We assumed tonight was on the house. It was, I said, this seat, this chance to hear the truth. That part was a gift. Neither of them said anything. Because for the first time, they realized what it meant to sit across from someone they couldn't control with a smile, or shame, or shared last name. As I turned toward the kitchen, I heard Marco's voice behind me. Professional as ever. The bill will be prepared promptly, ma'am. And for once, the Summers name would be attached to a check. Not a favor, not a discount, just a bill. Paid in full. The kitchen doors closed behind me with a soft hiss, muffling the quiet clatter of silverware and the stunned silence I'd left behind. Inside, the world was different. Warmer, sharper, alive with motion. Steam rose from copper pots. Plates clinked against marble countertops. Chef Antoine caught my eye and gave a subtle nod, already plating the next round of tastings for our London launch. This was my space. No theatrics, no hierarchy of bloodlines or borrowed names, just creation, precision, purpose. I leaned against the prep counter for a moment, letting the scent of seared scallops and truffle oil ground me. I'd spent years pretending their absence didn't hurt. Tonight proved I'd finally stopped needing them to notice me, because they had. And it wasn't enough. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Then again. And again. 3 messages. All from the dining room I had just exited. The first was from Riley. I didn't know. I'm sorry for everything. I was wrong. Can we talk? Just us. Then my mother. You've become someone extraordinary. I wish we'd seen it earlier. Let's reconnect. Lauren. Please. And finally, from my father. The one who always looked at me like a deviation from the family blueprint. I misjudged you. I see that now. I want to understand. When can we talk? I stared at the screen for a moment. Not with anger. Not with pride. Just clarity. They weren't reaching out because they finally respected me. They were reaching out because, for the first time, I was out of reach. And that was the difference. I typed slowly, thoughtfully. No venom. Just the truth. Reservations required. 3-month wait. No exceptions. I hit send. That was it. No scolding. No second chances wrapped in grace. No invitation to undo what had been done. Because this wasn't revenge. It was a reminder that access is not a right. It's a privilege. And for once, I had the power to decide who got it. The city was quiet by the time I got home. Manhattan, at midnight, still pulsed below, but from up here, it moved like a distant tide, gentle, distant, insignificant. I unlocked the door to my apartment, a top-floor penthouse that spanned the entire building. Not glass and gold, not some cavernous showpiece with walls made only to impress. It was simple, quiet, mine. Soft lighting stretched across polished hardwood, shelves lined with cookbooks and wine logs. One oversized window faces the skyline, a single framed review on the entryway table, untouched since the day I first hung it. I took off my coat and walked toward it, fingers grazing the edge of the frame. The paper was slightly yellowed now, but the words were still sharp. Unknown, underestimated, unstoppable. The first restaurant I ever opened. The first time anyone wrote about me without attaching me to someone else's name. I stood there for a long moment, letting those 3 words settle in my chest. They weren't a battle cry. They were the truth. I poured a glass of water, set my phone down beside the review, and opened the text window one last time. No new messages, just the 3 I'd already answered. Still, something felt unfinished. Not for them, but for me. I typed slowly, deliberately. One sentence. No venom. No punctuation meant to provoke. Just the final line they would remember. Next time you look down on someone, remember. They might own the ground you're standing on. I didn't wait for a reply. I placed the phone face down beside the review, crossed the room, and drew the curtains back. Outside, the lights of the city flickered, trying so hard to prove they belonged in the sky. But up here, I didn't need to shine to be seen. I just needed to stand where I'd built something no one could take. And tonight, for the first time, I realized that was enough. If you've ever had someone underestimate you, only to come back needing you, if you've ever been treated like an afterthought, until the moment you couldn't be ignored, tell me your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, like and subscribe. Because sometimes, the quietest voice in the room is the one they remember most.